boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you?
Hello everyone, and welcome to our 8th video lecture. We're still in period 4, but this is our second lecture in this period on Andrew Jackson and Nullification Crisis. Let's get right into this. Remember, this is our big picture question that we've been dealing with now for a couple of weeks. This is in the classroom, but I put it up here again just to kind of remind you about what we're talking about. Here are our 3 key concepts as well. We're building off of these in the class. So if you want to familiarize yourself with them still, you want to take a few moments, maybe pause the screen and make sure you remember what these concepts are. In this lecture, we're going to look at a couple of them specifically. We're going to look at 4.1, point Roman numeral 1, A and C. So we see here the nation's transformation to a more participatory democracy. During the time of Jackson, we have what's known as the rise of mass democracy, universal manhood suffrage. In other words, all white men can now vote. Yay! Right? A huge big step in democracy. But this also again continues the debates over federal power, which we've talked about several times now. We see a huge relationship between the federal government and the states. Who has the more power? It's an ongoing struggle here. And A, we've talked about this as well in the past, looking at various constituencies and interest groups form these political parties. We had the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, or Jeffersonian Republicans. But now we're going to start moving into the era of Democrats. They're going to drop the Republican name, and they're going to just be Democrats, and a new political party that will merge here shortly, and we'll talk about that in class later on, the Whigs. I also want you to look at America's debate at the scope of government's role in the economy. Talked about this before as well, and that's going to play a huge role in today's lesson. Key concept 4.3, Roman numeral 2, letter B. Various American groups and individuals initiated, championed, and or resisted, notice I have this underlined, resisted the expansion of territory and our government powers. All right, so we're going to see that at times as the president especially would expand his powers, the states especially would push back. And we're going to see how Jackson will be one of these kind of presidents. As the federal government attempts to assert its authority over states, there's going to be resistance from state governments. And today's example will be the Nullification Crisis. So this is the important concept. The federal government is trying to assert its authority, and states are going to push back. States' rights, right? They're going to try and stop the government from having too much authority. Well, let's get into this Nullification Crisis. And it's all about tariffs. See, what had happened was Jackson did not win the election of 1824, and he cries the corrupt bargain against John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay. But there are Jacksonian supporters in Congress. And this 20th Congress comes along, and they want to try to ruin John Q. Adams. They want to try and make sure that he cannot get reelected. So they come up with a plan. We have protective tariffs. We've talked about them back during James Madison's presidency. He had his annual message, and he realized that perhaps a good thing to protect American manufacturing. And that comes around in 1816. But they slowly have been creeping up in the amount of tax they put on imported goods. And these Jacksonians think about, well, let's raise the protective tariff rates even higher. Right? This, they believe, is going to hurt John Quincy Adams. They introduced the bill in March of 1828, which is an election year. 1828 is an election year. They introduce it claiming they need to help Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio. There's different types of manufacturing going on here in Pennsylvania, wool industry. We've got to protect it. But they realized that the South would obviously not want protective tariffs, right? These are men of honor, right? They see everything as an insult against them. They sell their product in an unprotected world, and they have to pay higher prices for the goods that they want from the North. They also figured the New England states would perhaps oppose this as well because of trade. This would become a win-win for Jackson. John Quincy Adams would try to support it. He would look bad. He would lose the election. Well, what happens is this bill actually passes. Enough of the New England and Western states will support this over the outrage of the South, and on May 19th, Adams signs it into law. But it doesn't go into effect until after the election of 1828. So Andrew Jackson will inherit a tariff he had nothing to do with. By the way, this nice little political cartoon here, it's an anti-Jackson cartoon. To the victor go the spoils. This is something known as the spoil system. I'll have to explain this kind of briefly here to you. When Jackson became president, he felt it was his right to look at all these federal jobs. There are thousands of jobs within the federal government. Some of these men, a small portion of them, but there were some of these guys who had been around since George Washington, and they're still collecting a paycheck from the federal government. So Jackson believed it was only right for the President of the United States to what he called a rotation system. Fire some of these old guys and bring in some new people in. This is an extension of, you may or may not remember, when Thomas Jefferson was president, they called it party patronage. It's now becoming spoil system, where the president will reward those people loyal to him and help get them federal jobs. Spoil system. All right, let's get back into this protective tariff and the Nullification Crisis. John C. Calhoun is an interesting character. This is a painting of him. John C. Calhoun, look at the crazy eyes. John C. Calhoun. Yes, there will be pictures of him, plenty to show. The crazy hair, the neck beard, those eyes that just seem like they want to strangle you. They scare me so bad. South Carolina begins to call this tariff that gets passed the tariff of abomination. It's an abomination thing. They believe it's an abolition plot, right? If they start raising taxes and they can control taxes, the next thing they're going to do is go after the economy of the South, which is based on slavery. So they see this as an abolition plot. John C. Calhoun is the vice president of Andrew Jackson. And he is going to secretively write a pamphlet just before he takes his oath of office, known as the South Carolina Exposition and Protest. It should also say in protest, but we normally just call it the South Carolina Exposition. In it, he argues that states were sovereign before the Constitution. In other words, the states had all the power. Do you remember what that government was called? I bet you do. I bet you do. Think about it. What was the government before the Constitution? I know you know. I know you know. It was very weak. States had all the power. No president. No judicial. Yeah, I heard someone say it. Articles of Confederation. Yes. So he goes back to this idea that before there was a Constitution, we had the Articles of Confederation, and the states were the sovereign power. The states then got together in a compact theory and formed the Constitution. Do you remember who first thought of compact theory? I know you know that too. I'll give you a moment. Yes, Thomas Jefferson and his Kentucky-Virginia resolutions. So he dusts off that old battle cry of Thomas Jefferson and he rewrites it into a South Carolina Exposition. But instead of just the idea of nullifying a law that you don't like, they actually kind of put forward the concept that perhaps a state can actually, leave the Union if they don't like what the federal government's doing. This leads to a huge problem in the government. There are now going to be states' writers who are going to be yelling and screaming that they have a right to nullify any law they don't like. People who believe in the Union begin to argue, how can just a small minority of Americans dictate to the majority of Americans what we can or cannot do. There's going to be a famous series of debates known as the Hayne-Webster debates that happen in Congress, January 19th through the 27th. Daniel Webster of Massachusetts will win these debates. He is for union. Hayne is from South Carolina, and he is for nullification. And there's going to be this famous moment, April 13th, 1830. It is the birth date of Thomas Jefferson. Now, Jefferson has been dead for 4 years, but they're still going to honor his birthday. And a bunch of men get together. The President of the United States is invited. Of course, John C. Calhoun's there. And it's mostly Southerners, and they're toasting left and right how great states are and states' rights. And Thomas Jefferson, compact theory forever, nullification forever. Going to keep our slaves forever. Going to tear down the tariff, tear down this government. Then Andrew Jackson has his famous toast. We're going to talk about that in class. So I'm going to save that for you guys. A little tease there. Look how I did that. But it starts to highlight all of the tension that's now going on in Congress and with the president and with his vice president. South Carolina is threatening to leave the Union. They want to get out because they don't trust the federal government anymore. They start calling themselves the Palmetto State. And they start having little state elections where they're electing people who will basically side with them on this issue. They start raising militias. Andrew Jackson is very angry over this because, come on, he's Andrew Jackson, right? He's running around telling everybody, I'm Batman. Basically that's what he is. He's the Batman of his time period. He's going to rain down I won't say it, but he's going to rain down some terrible things on South Carolina. And he gets Congress to pass the force bill that basically allows him to go into South Carolina if needed and enforce tariff law. Okay, and if any state tries to cause any violence, he can bring in the Navy, he can bring in the Army, and he can force them to capitulate to federal law. Now, there's a time period on this. This force bill is only going to run its course for, I think, a year or two, and then it's going to go out. Well, it looks like the Civil War is going to happen. Enter Henry Clay, the great compromiser. He will start working a secret deal with John C. Calhoun, the man who wanted nullification. And they come up with the compromise tariff of 1833. They'll gradually lower the rates of that tariff of abomination. Over the next few years, they'll lower the rate about 20% a year until they can get it to about the rates of 1816. And the South agrees, the North agrees, nullification is over. But the big thing about this is that Henry Clay and Calhoun, who really don't like each other, but they come together just so that Andrew Jackson can't claim any victory here. That they averted the issue that basically John C. Calhoun actually started. But, that's politics. That's men of honor for you. Alrighty. So for further reading, if you want to read about the Jacksonian presidency, you want to go to page 310 to 313, and you want to go to the subheading Jacksonian presidency 1829-1837. And I love my little political cartoon there. Jackson with his gun. Anybody else care to discuss politics? Not that guy. Alrighty, everybody. We'll talk later.